I want to talk about money. I want to talk about what's happening to our money in particular. In Canada, our money is being diluted, and obviously we have taxes. We have taxes up the wazoo. We have more taxes than you could ever dream of or have a nightmare about. We have all these taxes. You have your federal tax, you have your provincial tax, and you have your municipal taxes through property. Then you go to the store, you get a couple of wobbly pops, you get a tax for that. You pay another tax when you fill up your. How many taxes are you paying when you fill up your car? There's taxes everywhere. There's taxes on everything, every single thing. And we're at the point where they're taxing so much. And when they can't get tax from us, and even though they're trying to raise taxes, there's one tax that nobody's ever talking about. And that one tax is inflation tax. Every time the government says, you know what, we're going to spend money, but we don't have it. We didn't collect it yet. The government's not spending money that they have. They're spending money that they don't have right now. And so what do? Well, you could borrow the money or you can print it. Print it out of thin air. You can issue new currency. I know Macklem says we don't actually print more money. Yeah, you issue new credit, and that is expansion of the monetary supply. And that is the other tax, because every time they print a new dollar, it dilutes the value of every dollar you have. And tonight, I have a guest that knows all about this and is helping people actually stave off the effects of inflation, because rising prices are, at the end of the day, just the effects of what inflation is. Inflation is the increasing of the monetary supply. So without further ado, Bryce Wade, welcome to the show, my man. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, man. Pleasure.
Yeah, and it was a pleasure actually meeting you in person. You look so small on the screen. You're actually ginormous. You're a big guy.
Yeah, 6'4" plus ego.
Plus ego. Fair enough. Fair enough. But yeah, thanks so much. And I brought you on because I wanted to talk about this. And I've been getting into this more and more on the channel, talking about finances. I have a bit of a history of being a total dork and reading economics
Oh,
books
really?
as like a pastime. I know. I'm such an interesting guy, right? And I got fascinated with the whole idea of the theory of money and credit brought about by Ludwig von Mises, the founder of the Austrian School of Economics. And it's huge that people just are unaware of how money works and how money even came to be in the first place. And so you're a representative for New World Precious Metals, and you've
Yep.
been helping people hedge that bet when the government comes in and spends your money right from out of your bank account. The number doesn't change, but your bank account's worth is different at the end of the day when they do this. So I don't know, just a backgrounder of what you do, and explain a bit more of how this works.
Sure. So I'll give you a little brief background on myself and how I got connected to gold and silver. So I've been into geopolitics and monetary policy, and the effects of these decisions on our society for going on 30 years now, because I realized very
Mm.
early on that there's problems in society. Why is there a problem, and what can we do about it is the ultimate question, right? And what I ultimately came to the conclusion of is the system that we live in, which is the monetary system, is broken and corrupt, right? It doesn't work for all of us, and the reason being is kind of what you alluded to, is two things, which is debt, number one, and the second thing is the interest on that debt. And so a really good example of this, and I'll backtrack back to this, but you can look at this as the amount of money that we're spending to service the debt that we have is now more than what we spend on our military, now more than we spend on our healthcare, and it's now more than we collect in GST. So all of the money that we all pay in GST now barely covers the amount of debt servicing that we have to pay. That's not even the principal. That's just
Right. So
interest on the debt.
that's just the interest alone. That's just
Yeah,
that portion of it.
yeah.
Now,
And so that
famously, Justin Trudeau had an argument with a reporter only a few years ago, and the reporter asked exactly that: like, how are we going to service this debt? How are future governments going to service this debt if you're adding so much to it? And his reply was, "We're at historic low interest rates, Glenn.
idiot.
Like no onward look into the future, and it could get worse. Who knows? Interest rates could skyrocket even higher."
And to compound that ridiculous nonsense that he said, Christia Freeland didn't print our debt that we printed over those years. She didn't print long-term debt; it's short-term debt. So the amount that we're paying now is actually going to go up because we have to refinance that debt because she didn't get a long-term debt. So this is kind of what I mean is that not
Oh,
only did you get debt, you're also paying an interest on that debt. And now the more that you pay on that debt, which is kind of what's happening in the US, because they pay almost $1 trillion in debt servicing. That's almost as much as they have paid for the military, which is the biggest on the planet in all of human history. And so this is the danger of printing money when you don't have a plan to reel it back. Like just think back in our lifetime, right? Because we're about the same age. When was the last time that we had a deficit? I mean a surplus.
oh, wasn't it in the Harper years? Didn't we have that?
Yeah, sort of. So he did that in the last year of his tenure, and he moved a bunch of stuff around because it was an election year. But I don't even believe that was a true surplus.
Oh,
He's like,
right,
"Hey,
right.
look, we just cut a whole
But
bunch of stuff, and now we have a surplus." But so before that,
right. So it's a surplus on the budget, but not a surplus on the actual like revenue that they have in the government. No, we've never had a surplus. We've
we
always
have.
had debt, and it's been well, not in my lifetime. I don't know if
Oh
it's
no,
been in
no,
my
not like a
lifetime. When was that?
yeah, sorry, not a surplus for the overall balance for the overall if we have debt, but yeah, it was the budget itself. So Harper made essentially that last year a bunch of stuff moving around. Is like, oh look, now we have a surplus the last year. So his entire tenure basically was negative. It was a deficit spending the whole time, and up until Trudeau, he was the biggest spender of deficit that we've ever had. And so the last
Right.
person that we had a surplus with was Paul Martin. So that was 9 years, I think, 8 years or 9 years before Harper.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's huge. That's huge. Like from what I understand, the public debt has just been accruing further and further and further, and
Yep.
there's no sight, there's nothing in sight that would indicate that this wealthy, rich country that has more resources than most in the world is ever gonna balance its books and then get back down to like we could honestly we could have no debt one day. That is a possibility, but
Hey, the budget will
they
balance
just
itself, man.
oh man, I know if I heard that enough times. If I heard that enough times, it's just ludicrous. But that's the thing. Like for such a wealthy country, I mean, we could be the Saudi Arabia of the North. You know what I mean? Like it isn't unheard of that could be a possibility. But here we are, and because of the debts that governments are addicted to, we're printing new currency as a result of it. Like we're not actually taxing dollars and then taking those tax dollars and then allocating them to a thing. Like this whole idea of pork barrel spending is the idea that you have these dollars allocated to a thing, but they're not even dollars that we have right now. We've already got a debt and we haven't paid that off. We're in a deficit, and yet we're still borrowing new money to throw it away at all these different causes. That's it's unsustainable.
It is, and that's kind of the point. So over the weekend, over the conference, and before I actually explain this, let me just finish kind of the intro because I never got back to it. So I got into gold and silver about 2 years ago because I've been looking at geopolitics and macroeconomics for years, and I know a lot about the world and how it works, but I've never really had an opportunity to use that in the other things that I've done over my life. And so I got into this, number one, so I could help protect myself and help other people protect themselves from what's coming down the pipeline. And that's what I'll kind of get into now is where are we going and where do we come from, right? So let me give you just a
Hmm.
brief overview of how the economy works in a very, very simplistic terms, right? So if you think of the economy as a whole, right, what is the basic unit of the economy? What is the smallest unit?
The smallest unit is
Yeah, of an
the
economy.
dollar, or what are you talking about? Are you talking about like the GDP or?
No, no. So, so there's things that make up the economy, and the smallest unit of an economy is a transaction, right? So there's
Oh,
nothing
okay. So a
happens.
single, yeah.
Yeah, like a single unit of the economy is a transaction. So that transaction could be any number of things. It could be $1 billion, or it could be I give you something, but it's still a transaction between people. So I'm giving you something
Mhm.
that you want, or I'm selling you something that you want that I have, right? That's the transaction. So that's the basic unit of the economy. And so throughout history, there's really only been four ways that you can do that, right? So number one was a barter system. So you've got some grain, I've got some sheep, I'll give you some milk, you give me some bread, something like that. That was what a barter system was. You've
Mhm.
got resources, I've got resources. We try to make it equal, right? The second one was some
Mhm.
sort of interchange or intermediary, which ultimately landed on gold. But this could have been bark or seashells or rocks or literally anything that we agree that I can take this and use it somewhere else to get resources that I need that you don't have, right? So they're intermediary
Because of
basically in
the
a
the the double coincidence of wants from the barter system.
right,
You have to trade with somebody who has the stuff that you want, or else there's no
right,
trade. It's not going to
exactly.
facilitate.
Right, and so we needed an intermediary. So, like, if you think about economic theory, this is really what economic theory is based on: is how do we move resources in between people through time, right? Because it doesn't do me any good if you only have all of this one thing, and I don't need it today, but I might need it next week. But I need something today that you don't have, and I have to go get it from somebody else. So I need to trade my wares somehow. So I need an intermediary, so I can use this as a universal intermediary between the resources that I have and the resources that I want.
Hmm.
So far, so good.
Money.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
that's what we came up with. And so so if anybody's interested in this, there's a really great book called The Ascent of Money by Niall Ferguson. So Niall Ferguson. Really great overview of how this process started and how it's advanced through time. So really good book to look into if you're interested in this. And so that was number two.
One book I have another book recommendation for people out there. It's a really fun one. It's by Jeffrey Tucker. It's called it's a Jetsons World: Public Miracles or Public Crimes and Private Miracles. And in the book,
I've
it's
heard
a
of that
bunch
one.
of short chapters, a bunch of really cool short chapters explaining how like economies work. And
Hmm.
one of the chapters is the economy of Halloween, and he describes how the kids go out for trick or treating, and then they come back, and then they look at their the plunder that they've got, and then they start trading. And he explains it as if it's like the trading floor at the New York Stock Exchange, and how how like things increase in value, and how a means of exchange, a medium of exchange, actually comes out of it, and why it became that. And it's such a fascinating read. It's another good book recommendation, incidentally. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, and you can apply this theory to literally any type of resource. It could be water, it could be nuclear power. Literally anything follows the laws of supply and demand. I don't care what you have if I don't want it, like because it doesn't matter if I don't need something. It doesn't matter what you have, right? It's only if I want something or
Hmm.
I need something that a transaction happens, and I don't have one of those things. And that's kind of the central
Hmm.
ethos of sales. I'm trying to sell you something that is either going to give you something that you want or solve a problem that you have. That's kind of one of the underlying uh, reasons for a sale, right? And so after you had the physical interchange, we had what's called number three, which was called fiat, which is essentially debt, right? And there's
Hmm.
a really old saying that goes like this. So gold is the currency of kings, silver is the currency of artisans, and debt is the currency of slaves, right? And so and I'll circle back to that, but that's number three essentially. So a fiat system was basically I have something at an interchange, and I'm going to put it somewhere safe, and because I have this asset, I'm going to give you a loan against it. So money lenders in the ancient world is another really good book called the Richest Man in Babylon. Really fantastic story if you want to get your financial house in order. Fantastic book for that. And basically, what that is the story of is how the richest people in Babylon, which is an ancient city, became rich, and so the ethos and the strategies of rich people. And so essentially, what it said is that I'm going to invest in myself and invest in things that people need to give me a return on the money that I invest. And to do that, you have to have some sort of debt because, like, hey, I'm going to give you this money, I'm going to charge you an interest on it, and you're going to give me a return when you make the money back within the confines of the deal that we agree to, right? And that's kind of
Hmm.
the underlying structure of our current monetary system. Okay, so that's number three.
Hmm.
Number four is what we're going to now, which is cryptocurrency and central bank digital currency, which is instant, anywhere, 100% of the time, as long as you can make that connection somehow. Now, there's other aspects to that, but there's a difference in that it's controllable, right? It's central bank digital currencies specifically. And so what they're trying to push us towards, and why I'm bringing this up, is that they want the basically total direct control over all transactions. And that's why this is an important thing and why I don't really trust crypto anymore. Because this is what they're essentially pushing us into, is that if I have the ability, let's say there's 5 people in a group, right? And I have the ability to control if those 5 people can make a transaction between each other, or if I can control how much money they have available to make a transaction, I have an inordinate, unbelievable, like oppressive amount of control over what you can do within that group of people. Right? It doesn't really matter how many people. The mere fact that I have that control at all skews all conversations with all people into what I want, because I could just be like, hey, you're going to make this decision or else. Well, what is the or else? You can't make the transaction, so you better do it the way I tell you to.
Yes, well, people have likened it to the mark of the beast, with saying
Yeah.
that, you won't be able to trade or you know, uh, exchange goods without this mark, and that's what has a lot of people scared. A lot of people scared with this whole
Should be.
digital central bank digital currency thing, and blockchain was the technology that came out of the free market, and people did it voluntarily with Bitcoin and Ethereum and all these other ones,
Hmm.
and especially a bunch of other ones that people got scammed with. We've all seen that over the past several years, and NFTs and all of that stuff. This is a technology that's come out, and now it's a technology that governments are usurping to use for their own, well, I'd say nefarious purposes
Very.
of control,
Hmm.
and the ability to just instantaneously issue new lines of credit to whomever they want. I mean, if any fiat currency, just making it easier for them to just print. That's it's exactly what they want. I mean, it's the envy of emperors of bygone eras, right? That used to clip coins and do all kinds of funny business with the money.
Yeah.
And now, wasn't there was like some emperor, I think, from Rome, and he put lead ingots inside the coins. He had like little lead ingots that he would mold into the coins, and it's just crazy what they would do.
Exactly. And so that is actually one of the examples of the first major inflation of a currency. And it's one of the reasons that the Roman Empire fell. Because what happened at that time, now tell me if you've heard this story before, is that the empire had wars all over the place. There was internal strife. There was a lot of social unrest happening. They were printing currency. They were spending more than they had. They had a negative. They had a deficit in exports, so they were importing more than they were exporting. So had a negative balance sheet essentially. Sound familiar at all?
It sounds like home sweet home, man.
Yeah,
It sounds like what we're doing right here, right now.
exactly. And so the
It's
original way
crazy.
that they exactly, and so the original way that they printed money was so they melted down some of the coins, and so the reason that they have the ribs on the edge of the coins is because they would shave off the edge of the coin into dust, melt that down into new coins, so that some of those coins wouldn't be whole coins. So if, let's say, back in the day it was 1 gold coin and 2 silver coins for something, and I could just print an extra gold coin where I've made a huge amount of money in ancient times, and if I can melt that down into something that looks pretty similar but it's not the same, I get 2 for the price of 1. Well, that's the original counterfeiting, and it has to be said that the only people that can counterfeit or print is the central bank. Otherwise, it's fraud and a felony.
Well, yeah, it should be a fraud and a felony for the government to do it as well, because
Should.
it is defrauding people. It is
It is.
defrauding people, and I can't stress this enough that inflation is a tax. It is absolutely a tax
It is.
on the store of value that you have. And you're talking about why money came out and why it became a thing. And it's been a bunch of different things over the generations and over the millennia. At one point it was salt, because salt was not, it was a bit scarce. There were
Worth their weight
shells,
in
a
salt is
bunch of
where
other
that
things.
saying came from.
Exactly. And what makes a money
Hmm.
is its store of value. the fact that it can store value, and then it's also potable, it's divisible. These are the Austrian definitions from
Yeah.
Ludwig von Mises when he was explaining money and credit. It has to be something that can be easily divisible and easily stored and easily and hold its value over time. And
Hmm.
what currency, this fiat currency that we're dealing with, that's backed by nothing. I mean, what backs the Canadian dollar? Just
Literally
the
nothing.
government's, well, the government's assurance that they'll pay back their bonds and things like that. Like that's it. It's just a confidence game at this point.
So there's
Really.
actually kind of an irony to that. So we had the Goldback currency, right? Up until that in 1971, basically when the U.S. dollar got off of that, all currencies were essentially pegged to the U.S. dollar, so they were all backed by gold. And when that went the way of the dodo bird in 1971, for 3 years there was significant amounts of inflation because they were printing more money than they had, and everybody was realizing, yo, this is backed by nothing. And they sent Henry Kissinger into Saudi Arabia and said, "Hey, you guys are going to make us a deal. We're going to give you all the weapons you want. We're going to protect you. We're going to be your good buddies. But for us, you're going to price all of your oil sales in U.S. dollars, and you're going to invest some of the excess profits that you make from this into U.S. Treasuries, which has essentially created the U.S. petrodollar. So the petrodollar that you've probably heard of, that's where that comes from. That ended on June 9th. Just ended, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And what
So
that means,
what's the repercussions of that ending? Like if that
probably
ends, I mean,
hyperinflation.
they could easily just status quo, just keep, kind of like when your lease ends and you go month to month with your landlord. You can just keep on going with how it goes, right? Or they can make a big change. And what would that look like?
Well, I'm not 100% sure on this because we're kind of in uncharted territory for a variety of reasons. But one of the implications of this is that the reason the US dollar was the world reserve currency for so long is because of the petrodollar, because the whole world was industrializing after being obliterated in World War II. And if you wanted to advance your economy and you wanted energy, and you wanted it because you wanted to advance your economy, because it's far more efficient to have, a truck driving than a horse pulling, right? And so to get that
Absolutely.
energy, they had to get US dollars, which created this massive synthetic demand for US dollars. So they could basically print unlimited amounts of money, more or less, into the market, and there would be an unlimited demand because they had to buy oil in US dollars. And that's changing. And so the big thing, the big risk of BRICS, like the whole BRICS nations, of which I think it's like 68 or 69 now or something, is
It's like
that
Brazil, Russia, India, China. That's what the BRIC stands
yeah,
for, right?
yeah, S is South Africa, and so there's still problems in the alliance, but the whole idea behind it is that they can use currencies other than the U.S. dollar. And the SWIFT system, which is the U.S. banking system that was created out of Bretton Woods after the war, is the basically the facilitation of transactions between banks and companies. So if I'm in South America, as an example, I'm like, hey, I got to pay this guy $200 million, and they're in Washington or something. Well, how does that money from South Africa get to Washington, right? It goes into the bank, and then they make sure that, hey, your client has this money in their account. We're going to accept it, and that's what banking is moving money around the planet, right? And so there's fees for that,
Right.
right? And so the central bank digital currencies, it basically completely removed that because it's all one currency and it's all in one place, which is the central banks. So really, what this is the coup, if you will, of sovereignty over the currencies of sovereign nations. Because if the central banks own the currency, and that's literally what it is, central bank digital currency, then they have absolute control, authority, and responsibility of that currency, removing the nation state completely.
Now, wouldn't it be a convenience though, like devil's advocate out here?
Hmm.
Wouldn't it be a convenience for people to have instantaneous transactions, like
Oh yeah, of
to not
course.
have to go through like that? That would be amazing if that
Yeah,
was
here.
something we could do.
Yeah, here. Let me show you this because it'll put this into perspective. I got a meme for that, or a visual for that. Where did I put it? It's this one. Is it this one? Yeah, here it is.
I'll pop this up on the screen here.
So this is from the
So
World
digital
Economic Forum.
identity.
Yes, so this is the war. This is from the World Economic Forum, and so this is the digital identity side of central bank digital currencies. So, social plat, where is it? Financial services, right? So this is one aspect of central bank digital currencies, but you can't really use central bank digital currencies as they're intended without this digital ID that incorporates all of the information. So I did a talk years ago about your digital real estate, right? So you right now are on Facebook, not YouTube. You have your face online somewhere, right? That's your digital real estate that is connected to you as a person. But who controls
Right.
that data? And where is that data held? Do you have your own DNA somewhere on your person or in your house? No, it's kept in a database somewhere at a hospital, right?
Yeah,
But
no.
that data about you exists out there somewhere, right? And what this idea is
Hmm.
amalgamating literally everything about you into one essentially barcode. So you're going to get a barcode on the side of your face basically that says this is you, and it'll be connected to your face and your fingerprint, and literally anything that you do ever in life will be connected to this number. And if the only way that you can do a transaction, that's why I said this earlier, is the transaction. If the only way that you can do a transaction is to use this digital identity, what if they just turn it off? What if they remove you from the system? What if they force you to not be able to do anything, right? This is why they want this power, is because they have ultimate and complete control over everything you do, everywhere you go, and everything that your future essentially.
Well, and here's the thing: like people will say, "Well, that's only for places like China. We
That's what's
wouldn't, they
happening
wouldn't
now.
do that here."
Yeah, that's
But
happening
we
now.
only have to go back a couple of years, and there was a bunch of, I don't know if you ever heard of this, but there was a bunch of truck drivers that went to the capital city of
No
Canada,
way, really?
Ottawa, and yeah, and they were like, "Hey, I don't like that decision that you made as a government," and the government was like, "Yeah." We're not going to talk to you, but what we're going to do is we're going to shut off your bank accounts so you can't pay your bills. And they
Yep.
did that using extrajudicial powers, and they had to declare a state of emergency. They had to invoke the War Measures Act, which ended up being called the Emergencies Act, and they did it illegally. But this is a fast track for that. Like this is really
Yep.
a fast track doing this digital currency stuff. They wouldn't even have to go through the effort of declaring a state of emergency. They wouldn't have to go through the effort of breaking the law and going against the what's actually in the Emergencies Act and right and all of that, and then have to fight it in court later. They wouldn't have to bother with any of that stuff. They'd be able to just, oh, I don't like that guy and what he's saying. Turn him off.
Yeah. And Tim Pool made a really good example of this. Is he owns a chicken coop, right? And when you own chickens, and I have a friend that has this problem that does this as well. When you have a chicken coop, right, you have a rooster and a bunch of hens, right? The hens are just in there to make eggs for you so that you can survive, and sometimes you get poultry too. But if there's ever a chicken in there that's just a problem, this chicken is killing other chicks, or chickens are just being a menace. You take it out, you remove it, and kill it. Well, that's essentially what we're walking into.
Yeah.
Is if they have the ultimate power, be like, man, this guy's really saying some stuff I don't like. Get him out of here, right? All it takes is this one button, boop, and you're done. That's it. You're dead.
Yeah.
Scary, eh?
Well, they do. I do believe that they look at us like livestock.
Yeah, they
And
do.
this came up at the conference that we're both at,
Mhm.
the Reclaiming Canada conference. This idea that that these people are the elites, and we need to really get that out of our heads. They're not elites.
Parasites.
They're parasites for sure, and they're sucking off of us, and we're doing all the work. And this is really where we're at with that. So, what do we do? What do we do to protect ourselves?
Well, this is kind of the thing that I always ask people, right? This is the ultimate question that we all have to ask, right? So if you say, and I think most people here probably agree, I don't want to be a slave. Me personally, I am absolutely never going to accept this stuff. I'd rather die, and I'll go down fighting it if necessary. However, I would rather not go down to, let's just like say, screw it. I'm moving out and I'm going into the woods, although that's a secondary plan of mine too. I'd rather save civilization rather than, go back 150 years or be a slave. Those are pretty shit options all around. So I'd rather not do any of those. So what that comes to is basically you have three options, right? These are the three options. Everybody has them. Eventually you're going to have to make a choice. And that's number one, You accept what the government says. That's essentially submission to what they say. And whatever happens to you is you're basically at their mercy, and that's never a good place to be, especially when they don't really like you in the first place. So, second option is a revolution. It has been tried hundreds of thousands of times over history, probably. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, right? But that doesn't necessarily guarantee success, and that usually breaks down whatever system that you're already in. So it's not usually the best choice. The only other option is a renaissance, and that's only happened once. And the reason that it happened once is that because the people in that time got educated and trained because they learned how to read, and they started getting ideas in their head of freedom. They started learning the Bible, and they were like, hey, if I'm one of God's children, I deserve these rights that the Bible says I have. Why is this idiot oppressing me all the time? Like the Braveheart was like, these guys are just walking in here and screwing us all over. Screw these guys. And so they got these ideas. They were like, I want a better life for me, and I want a better life for my community, and we got to work together to figure it out. And that ultimately is what my choice is, that we have to work together, right? There is no way that with all the problems that we face, World War III and famine and economic collapse that's coming down the pipeline and all the other stupid nonsense that's happening, there is no way that you're going to be able to do this alone, which requires that you figure out how to work in a community. And that's one of the reasons we're in the situation that we are, is because we have lost that civic duty and the ability to work together to solve these complex problems, because we essentially farmed out our civic duties to our representatives and politicians that don't give a shit or are too dumb to figure it out anyway, right? And so, my answer to this is,
we're asleep at the wheel, right? That's it. We're asleep at the wheel.
Absolutely. And so my answer to that question is that everybody that listens to this lives in a physical community somewhere. You're supposed to have a physical representative in that physical community that represents you. You have to ask the question, do they? And if it's no, well, why do they represent you at all, right? You got to get involved, you got to get loud, and you got to make moves, right? There is, and this is why I'm actually white-pilled, not black-pilled, right? Because there's a lot of people that look at this sort of stuff and get black-pilled and like, it's over, these guys have overwhelming power and money and resources, and they do, but they haven't won, and we still have a choice, right? And that's why I say this. And so you, whoever you are and wherever you are, you have to make a choice. Am I going to accept this or not? And if the answer is no, then you have to aim for something better. What is the world that you want to live in look like, and how are we going to get there together, right? And the only way that you can do that is by having conversations, knowing where you want to get to, and figuring out a way to do it. And so I did a presentation. I think I shared this with you, but I'll just bring it up briefly if I can find it. Here it is. And so I'll just share this really quick. And so this is the process. So you asked how, this is how. I can blow that up a little bit. There we go. So I did this presentation to the independents of BC because they asked me like, hey, how do I connect with people? Well, this is how. Everybody here, and I'm sure you as well, has something that's important to you and your family, right? And there's a result that you want but don't have, or there is a result that you have but don't want, one of those two things, right? So you have to start with a result. I want freedom. Well, the question is, who is trying to take away my freedom? And what are we going to do about it? So the answer to whoever that question is, somebody is responsible. And a perfect example is that Arif Viraji idiot that's pushing C63. Absolute communist. The guy is C63 is the criminalization of free speech. So he is an enemy of Canadians, Canada, and free speech. Screw him. I hate that guy. And this question of who's trying to take away my freedoms, he is one of those people, right? And so the answer after you get that is, well, what actions am I going to take, and what choices do I need to make sure that result that we collectively want, we're going to be able to achieve, right? And what skills, how many people, what are we going to do, and how are we going to do it? That is this hand of change, if you will, is the process to figuring out. I can't give you all the answers, but everybody has the ability to do this. Nobody is stopping you from asking questions. Nobody is stopping you from getting answers, and nobody is stopping you from taking action yet, because they are trying. And lots of actions are being taken against us to prevent us from doing that. They're trying to disarm us. They're trying to censor us. They're trying to take over the internet. They're trying to destroy the economy. They're indebting us. There's lots of stuff that they're doing. And you can't focus on everything all the time, but you can pick something, anything, that I can make a difference in, whatever is most important to you, and find other people that care about it too. And there's people in your physical community that are like, hey, you're saying some stuff that I like, let's do this together, right? But it always starts from a question of, why is this bullshit happening to me, and who's responsible for it, and what am I going to do to figure it out and fix it? Because you we're never going to be saved by people that want to destroy us. Which who does that leave? You and me. That's it. Just
Yeah,
you and me,
that's
bro.
it. That's it. Well, we need a team of people. We actually absolutely need to get together with individuals. I love going out and meeting people like in person.
Hmm.
It's like especially people who are viewers of the channel, people who are members of the community, that kind of thing. Because then you get an instant feedback, but you also get like other people's stories of like where they came from and why they're fighting, and the reasons why they're fighting. I think I find it just so fascinating. And so yeah, I encourage people go out and do little things, get little things, get the ball rolling. One of the things that I think is it's not a uniquely Canadian thing, but it's always been something that Canadians have always been proud of, is that people can communicate with each other. You're just like walking down the street or whatever.
Yeah.
And I notice people are shying away from doing that. So I found it like an effort of mine when I just see somebody waiting in a line or something like that, just spark up like
Yeah.
just a conversation or
Yeah, me
whatever.
too.
Not
It
not
feels
about
good to just
anything
put a smile on, you know?
particular. Yeah, yeah, and just say something like it doesn't have to be anything in particular. Just like, oh yeah, the weather's great today, something like that. Just like, but it put a pep in your step. You know what I mean? And then
Yeah.
you feel more confident with the idea that there's community around you, and that you can just access that community, and you can just talk with people. It is really that easy. And yeah, you might have the odd jerk that's just like, yeah, whatever, man. I'm ordering my coffee, whatever.
Yeah, yeah,
But I
totally.
don't. I've never experienced it. I've never experienced that actually.
Yeah, most people are nice. Like Canadians are, we take pride in being polite, kind, generous, collaborative, right? And the idiots ruling us are none of those things, right? And to give you an
No.
example of what you were talking about, I was in a small town in the middle of Alberta. I was on a trip, right? And so this town was like 100 people. I was just driving through, I was grabbing gas. And this guy from Quebec drove up and was getting gas. He's just standing there, we're just like pumping gas. He's like, "Hey, yeah, this Justin Trudeau guy is no good, eh?"
Oh, I love
Like,
it. I
yeah,
love
dude. And
it.
we just stood there for like 10 minutes, like just roasting Trudeau. And he was from the other side of the country. And we just like one word, all it takes. You make a connection with somebody. I'll never see that guy again. But I have that amazing story. I'm like, man, we both hate Trudeau the same way. That was great.
Oh, I bet he's got a similar story that he's telling all his Quebec friends. It's
Yeah.
hilarious. That's great. So, what are you doing to help people as well financially in this whole thing? Because you're with New World Precious Metals, and you've been helping people to basically hedge their bets against what the government's doing to our money and our savings. In
Mhm.
turn, they're basically robbing our savings. Is
Yeah.
what they're doing every time that they give to $20 million to some foreign country to run a propaganda ad for their local warlord. This is all on our dime, and it's coming right out of your savings account
Yeah.
when they're printing new money to do this.
Yeah. So let me just give a little bit of a background, and I'll get into that. So you think back to ancient times for a second, okay? So all of the
Hmm.
gold in all of human history is basically that we've mined ever in human history is basically still here. There's very little demand for gold industrially. There is a little bit, but not a lot. And so there's probably about 10% of the production of gold goes into industrial. So 90% of what we mine is essentially a hard asset that's used for monetary purposes. Silver is about 50%. There's a huge demand for silver because it's such a good conductor and a variety of other things. But gold specifically has always been a monetary metal. There's really not a lot of stuff other than jewelry that really gets used for it for all of ancient human times, right? And so when you had a country or an empire or a state or a city state or whatever, if that city state empire whatever held gold, right? They held it, it was always in somebody's hands, right? And so if you think back to like the Roman Empire as an example, right? Gold was one of the things that they used for transactions all throughout the empire. And when it fell,
Hmm.
somebody still owned that gold, right? So gold specifically is a way to move money through time, right? Because I could give it to my family and they could keep it and they could use it as investment and they could leverage it in the new currency of the next empire. And that's what happened throughout time. So there's lots of different groups of people that have done this, and what it basically meant is that whatever the fiat of the time was, if I held gold, I guaranteed that my value that I put forth, that I worked for over the life of my efforts was held in physical form somewhere, right? And so one of the ways that we help
Mhm.
people protect their wealth and give you something that you can keep in your family essentially forever if you wish is selling gold and silver to people and exchanging your fiat currency for a hard asset that the government can't take. Now, somebody asked me right at the beginning when I was hopping on, if there was a war, will the government take your gold? Yeah, potentially they might, and they did that in right after the depression in 1929. And so, and I'll show you this as well because I think it's important. But I just got to find it for a sec. But one of the things that happened, so in the run up to the depression in 1929, like we all remember this, there was like the booming 20s, right? A lot of that was debt, right? And so all of this money that was printed over that time by the central bank, might I add, that was started in 1913, um, went into all areas of the economy. And so one of the things of the economy is if I invest money into something and it produces something that nobody wants, that corporation or that company or that entity dies because I invested
Mhm.
all this money, I can't get it back, it dies, right? That's part of the economy that just happens, right? So it's a bankruptcy as an example. And it happened so much and so often. You remember like the Wolf of Wall Street, where they did that on a massive scale in 1929, 1928, 1927, that area, and it caused a collapse because the value shot up so high. Well, eventually you hit a top and it falls, and that's what happened. So it took, basically
Mhm.
13 odd years for that run up to happen, and it fell down 90% in 3 years. So from 1929 to 1933, more or less, so 4 years, I guess, it was a massive decline. And over that time, after that decline was started, they confiscated a whole bunch of gold. And then once they confiscated a whole bunch of gold up until about 1933, they repriced the price of gold. So there was a 40% lift. So the government basically took a whole bunch of gold and said, all right, now it's worth this much money, 40% more. And then they used that to finance, as an asset to finance the reinvestment for the war and the recovery in the 1930s. So the dirty 30s was a really dark time for a lot of people. No jobs, nothing was moving. The reason for that is there wasn't enough money to grease the hands of everybody to keep the economy moving. And so the only reason that we haven't hit a recession already is because the governments are printing ungodly amounts of money. Like I can't even explain to you how much money we've printed in the last 4 years. But we Canada have doubled our national debt, roughly $650 billion. How much of that do you think was well spent and not corrupt and not fraud?
Well, I was just saying before I had you on, I was talking about how, if you look at the ArriveCan scandal, how
Mhm.
an app that was supposed to cost you about, there was supposed to cost us all $200,000, and then it
Yep.
ballooned to $60 million, and most of that was just embezzled into these like, friends of bureaucrats themselves, and then it's coming out that all of the billions and billions of dollars that they've been spending. You look at every time we look into with committee, where's the money going? Who's it going to? We find out about all these little, fly by night corporations that, bureaucrats are putting up and bidding on their own contracts, that they're the ones they're awarding to. The corruption is just off the chains. It's incredible the amount of corruption and embezzlement that's happening within the government. And it's all on our dime. We're losing. We lose and they're winning.
Yeah, they're socializing the losses and privatizing the gains, is what that's generally known as. But in this case, the ultimate goal is to roll out central bank digital currencies. And so for that to happen, so let's just agree for a second. Maybe everybody here might not agree on this, but let's just say for a second that this is true. That the ultimate goal is to roll out digital currencies and digital IDs so that they can have total control of everybody, right? Why would anybody
Mhm.
sign up for that if I have enough money in my pocket, a job to go to, and my family's not starving? I don't care about your stupid digital bullshit. I don't need it. So what do I need you for? Right.
Yeah.
But if you collapse that entire system and people can't feed their family and they have no jobs or they have nowhere to go or no hope, well, people are desperate. Just like, here, big daddy government, just fix my problems for me. Right. And so at that point, when people are
Hmm.
desperate, they're like, hey, we've already got the legislation for universal basic income, which is essentially communism rebranded, that we all pay for, just an aside. And all of the other structures that they require for this have already been implemented. And so I'll post this for everybody. So there's a guy that everybody should take a look at named George Gammon. brilliant guy. If you haven't seen him at all, George Gammon, I'll just post it in the chat here. Fantastic guy. And what I posted here specifically in the link that I just posted here, that is an overview of the central bank digital currency and how that will function in society. And so the BIS, which is the Bank of International Settlements, so this is the highest authority in banking on the planet, and they are the central bank of central banks, and they have a plan to essentially do this and roll this out universally across the world, and so everybody will be locked into or connected to this system, right? And so he does a really good job of explaining in very simple detail how this would work and what it would look like. So I highly encourage everybody that's interested in this. Somebody just said the Great Reset. This is exactly what that is. And it's a really good example and illustration of what that would actually look like, right? And so to take it back to gold and silver, right? Remember those 4 options that you have. You're only going to have 4 options to transact. Well, how much cash does anybody have on hand these days? Very little, right? Because we have a digital card where my money in my account is just transferred to another bank in their digital account, right? And so if I don't want to go back to bartering, I either have to have gold or fiat currency. And if they're closing branches, which is happening all over the West right now, Australia, it's happening in all over China. I keep a very close eye on China because they're basically a canary in the coal mine of what's coming down the pipeline. And that's happening all over China right now. They're refusing to let people let people get the money out of their accounts because they don't have it anymore. And that's what's called a run on the bank. And this is what happened in 1929. And so the risk of all of this and what we're kind of talking about is at some point it collapses and people can't get their money out, right? And so whenever I tell people, and somebody asked me, in the chat there, what do I do if I want a sandwich and they don't take your shiny stones? Great point. Well, remember that the ultimate point of currency is an intermediary for a transaction. So you're trying to get resources you don't have. So it's better to have the resources first that you ultimately want. And if you don't have them, well, what are you going to do to trade for them? Right. So it's always better to have the resources that you want. And I've said this a lot over the weekend, too, is that there's 5 aspects to this. Right. There's skills, assets, resources, protection, and community. That is basically what civilization is. And then you use a transaction as an intermediary between those 5 things. Right. And so the ultimate goal of what I'm trying to tell everybody is that this is one of the few options that you have to be completely out of the system, have absolute authority and control over your ability to transact with somebody else. And ultimately, the reason that I don't like cryptocurrencies that much is because whatever cryptocurrency you choose, you have to have 2 things. One, the ability to transact with somebody else, which means they have to have the capacity to do so, and the internet. And to a greater degree, electricity. So if you don't have those 2 things, you can't use cryptocurrency as a transaction, right? And so gold is physical. If I'm standing here and you're standing in front of me and you have the resources and I don't, if I have a gold coin or a silver coin or whatever, at least that's an intermediary or a possible intermediary between what you have and I don't, right? So in a grid down scenario, if you will, you still have something that is potentially valuable that you can trade for with what you want but don't have. And that's why it's important, even at a small level, right? And so cash, if things go really sideways initially, cash would be best because everybody understands that. But eventually and ultimately, it is going to be what you have and what you're able to provide that's going to be the most important thing. So skills, assets, and resources is number 1. So if you don't have the hard asset or the skill itself to provide to somebody else, well, you better have something else of value that you can trade for to get what you need or want. Right. And that's one of the purposes for gold and silver. Now, that's kind of going into apocalypse scenario, right? So if you look at it from the other side, which is what does it look
very
like?
Much like that.
It is. So that's the worst case scenario. What's the best case scenario, right? The best case scenario is with all this debt and all the craziness that's happening, all the war and all the other nonsense, this is one of the best investments you could make right now. And the reason being is because the demand is skyrocketing and the supply is declining. And so all of the central banks around the world, all of the Eastern authoritarian BRICS countries, super high net worth individuals, those are major players in any way you look at that. They're all buying gold and silver because it's a real hard asset that's not the US dollar. So there's this idea of de-dollarization that's happening, right? And so no matter how you look at this, gold and silver has been a historic hedge against the uncertainty of the world for basically our entire history. So if you want to protect your wealth, there's nothing that's safer. And the reason being is that there's no third-party risk. When I buy gold and silver and I control it, Nobody else can take it from me unless the government is coming to kick your door in or somebody tries to rob you, but they can do that anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
No matter what you have, right? And the difference is what it means by no third party risk is that if let's say I buy a investment property like a apartment building with eight units in it, that requires the third party risk there is I need somebody in that unit paying me so that it covers its expenses. So that's the risk that I have, is that if those people aren't there, I'm negative and I lose, right? So there's a risk there, right? But if I hold
Right.
gold and silver, there's no risk. I control it and I get to decide when I give it away.
Understood. Yeah, it's the whole idea of storing your value is really what interests me, because everybody's got a little nest egg and everybody's got a little bit of a savings. But the big third party risk in my assessment is the government coming in and diluting the my savings. So you put away. So for example, you put away $50,000, for example, and you put it
Mm-hmm.
in a savings account. You get almost no interest on those savings accounts these days. It's ridiculous. I know they're charging 5% prime rates, but you're not seeing 5% on your investment into a savings account. But what you are seeing is what your purchasing power of your dollar dwindling every single day. It's getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse due to the effects of inflation. And again, I'm reiterating this. These are the effects of inflation. Inflation is the increase of the monetary supply. They're
Yep.
they're 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 diluting your currency. They're diluting the savings that you have. So when I look at gold and I look at silver, I look at it long term. I'm looking at it in a sense of like, okay, well, what was it like 1,000 years ago? You could buy like a finely tailored suit and dinner
Yeah.
for an ounce of gold. And 100 years ago, you could buy a finely tailored suit and a nice dinner for an ounce of gold. And today, you can get a finely tailored suit and a nice dinner for an ounce of gold. It's just an ounce of gold happened to be like 20 something dollars 100 years ago or so, and now it's like $3,000. The value in money, so the money is less valuable now. It's not the other way around. It's not that the gold is in fact astronomically growing in value. It's holding its store of value like it has done for eons, for as long as we've had working economies with money. Essentially,
Mm-hmm.
is that's kind of what I'm getting at, and that's my understanding of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a very visceral example of how that works. So if you average out the value of gold over time and say like the last hundred odd years, that it's gained about 7% of value over that time. The reason for that is the value of the US dollar and all of the currencies it is valued in has gone down. Your purchasing power has gone down from inflation, because we've always been in an inflationary environment because of how our monetary system works. Because you got to remember, right? Think about this for a second. Okay, this is important. So think about all of the money in existence. Okay, all of it. There is literally hundreds of trillions of dollars in existence, because our global GDP is about 70 or 80 trillion. I can't remember the last number it was. Maybe it's 80 trillion a year or something like that. And the US is about a quarter of that, because they're the $25 trillion GDP or something like whatever it is. And so
Mm-hmm.
of that, all of that money through all time, because we've lived in a central bank environment for basically this last 100 years, all of that has been loaned at interest, right? So what that means is that there isn't enough money in existence in the system to pay for the debt and the interest, right? What that means, and what the implication of that is that somebody has to lose. Somebody always has to
Yeah.
lose for somebody to get all of that extra. So if I'm loaning out my money to somebody else and somebody can't pay, well, somebody has to lose because somebody got that money that didn't exist, right? And so it's the
Mm-hmm.
interest on the debt that is really crushing our system, and why we're experiencing all of this inflation, because that interest has to be paid, because if you default, everything collapses, right? And that's what happened. It's happened lots of times throughout history, hundreds and hundreds of times throughout history, is that, hey, I can't pay my debts anymore, and the country or the nation state or the whatever collapses, right? And that's what happened to Rome. That's what happened to Sri Lanka recently. Lots of different places have experienced this.
One thing I find fascinating is like we have all these politicians that are happy to do this, but they're also preaching about conservation and the environment. And I find this fascinating because money is, like I said, a store of value. And if governments are spending money on a borrowed dime, for
Mm-hmm.
example, what they're
Mm-hmm.
doing is they're let me take it back one step back further. Money is a store of value, and it basically it's a signal for essentially goods and services that are out in the economy. Like
Mm-hmm.
anything that's available that's out there, it can be purchased with that money. Now, if you buy stuff on debt, like the governments do, what you're doing is you're consuming in the immediate
Mm-hmm.
instead of foregoing to consume in the future.
Right.
And this is what they're doing. And this is the opposite of conservation. This is the opposite
Right.
of any sort of environmentalism. They're consuming tremendous amounts here and now. And it's crazy. It's crazy that they don't even see this. And I think because like there's a few ways of looking at this. There's the way of looking at it like this is diabolical, this is an evil plan, this is what
Oh, it is.
they have in their yeah. But then there's also the other way of looking at it, that they're a bunch of idiots. They're
That's
high
true.
school teachers, and they're all these other things that are not smart, or they're not intelligent. They just won a popular contest and got themselves into government, and they're all flying by the seat of their pants and don't know what they're doing, but want to look smart. So they're doing what they can with the power that they have and spend a bunch of money on things, and they think it'll make it better. Obviously,
Mhm.
you go with the plan that they're
Well, it's
evil
both.
geniuses or
It's literally both.
whatever.
Well,
It's literally
because there's no
both.
forethought. Yeah, it is. Well, there's no forethought, right? Because me and you probably agree on this. Is that I want to have my family do good. I want your family to do good, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. How do we have a economic? Why don't we have an economic system that supports that? Then we don't.
Well, I mean, we could
We
have
could
a system
exactly.
of
We could.
yeah. We absolutely could. We
And
absolutely could. But no, we have a system that's pitting people against each other for
right,
handouts from the government, instead of
exactly.
having voluntary exchange, which leads to a more of a peaceful endeavor. Because this is what I love about the market economy. By the way, is
Hmm.
this think of it this way. If you go to you go to the government and they say here you go, and you say thank you, and they say you're welcome. Wait, what? In the market economy, you do anything. Think of this: when you go to a store, you go to any place, you go to a guy's garage sale, you buy something on Facebook Marketplace. You hand over the money, they hand over the goods, and what happens? You say thank you, and the other guy says thank you back to you.
Yeah.
There's an equal exchange that occurs there. People aren't getting ripped off.
Mhm.
If you felt you were getting ripped off, you wouldn't be entering in that exchange. So this
Yeah.
is this is the idea that in a voluntary society where you exchange with each other, that breeds cooperation, and I truly believe that.
Yeah, I agree, and I like to use the example of the U.S. The U.S. United States of America is a really good example of this, because at the beginning, at the dawn of the U.S., when the dawn of the U.S. dollar, and this is something I highly recommend everybody look into of how this could potentially work to fix this problem. So they were part of like the 13 colonies were part of the British Empire, and they were like, hey, you're going to tax us 2% on tea. Get out of here! We're like, we're not having this anymore. Revolution on 2%. Right now, we're getting taxed at like 40% or something ridiculous.
I,
But
I,
anyway,
well, exactly. There's a 2% tax on one commodity alone.
yeah, they were like, no, that's it, bro. That's war. You're talking about taxing our tea, bro? Out of here. But anyway, so they basically said like, hey, screw these guys, we're done. And so they made the Declaration of Independence, and they fought a war about it. They fought a war of independence, right? But how are they going to
Mm.
fix their remove themselves from the British system of economics and currency, right? So they figured it out. Be like, all right, we need our own currency. We don't want to use these guys anymore. And that process is what started that question is what started the answer to get to the action that gave them the result of the U.S. greenback. And what made the greenback different is that they didn't have a central bank, right? That is the difference. And so the U.S. basically created the I can't remember the name of it. The General Bank, not the Central Bank. I can't remember the name of the bank that they created. It doesn't matter anyway. They created a bank basically, but it was controlled by the government. It was actually government controlled. It was under the authority of Congress, and it was managed by the Congress, the people's house. That's what Congress was, and they were there to manage the money of the country, right? And they removed that in 1913 under the can't remember the act. I can't remember the act that did that, but they created the central bank and the IRS in the same act in 1913. I can't. So I'm sure somebody will look it up. Um, but when they created that, they basically gave away the ability to create and print money and the monetary policy over to what is essentially a private entity that controls monetary policy instead of the sovereign state control. Right. And so of the people, by the people, for the people. Right. That's what it was supposed to be. And it was up until that point. Right. And so what this means basically is that we could do it again. we don't have to live with the garbage system that they created for us. It's just that nobody knows all this sort of stuff.
We need another Andrew Jackson. He was the one who single-handedly didn't he fight off like 4 attempts for central bank and he was known for shooting people.
Yeah.
We could use another Andrew Jackson in this day and age.
Totally.
Or a Jesus Christ throwing the moneylenders out the temple. That was I mean, yeah, I always go down in history, of heroes that did that stuff. Now, before we go too long, I want to get into New World precious metals and how you're helping people.
Oh, sure.
And to save now we're getting down to the nitty gritty because it's like, well, how do you what's the logistics of this? If you want to get into gold and silver, how can you do this? Why go with New World precious metals instead of some companies going to say you bonds or something like that?
Sure. So I'll start by saying, so New World Precious Metals is a brokerage. And so what that means basically is we have access to buy things at wholesale and give people a better deal than you can get retail. So I live in Vancouver. That's the background behind me here. And there's Vancouver Bullion Exchange. So if you walk down there, you can just go in there and be like, hey, I want to buy some gold. They'll sell you some gold. But they have some requirements on that. So anything over, I think, $3,000. Pardon me. You have to give a bunch of information. So we don't require as much information. We just need your name, phone number, email address, and address, and we can just deliver it to your door. So that's one of the things that we can do as a broker. And so we have the ability to save people a little bit of money in that way. So gold specifically, the margins are razor thin. They're pretty much universal. You won't find too much of a better deal. You may be able to save like 1 or 2%, but we can really save people more on silver because there's more premiums on silver. And so just to explain to everybody what
the hassle of like trying to figure out how to go out and buy bullion. I mean, you specialize in that, and you that's your service you're providing for people.
Exactly. We'll walk you through it. We can explain a whole bunch of stuff. We've got a couple other things too. But if you just want some like training, or so like, hey, how does this work or what this is, we do seminars and like online sessions to help people learn about this sort of stuff. If you're interested in that, we can do that too. But we hold people's hands basically. That's what you want a broker for. And usually brokers are for like high net worth individuals. Typically, like, hey, I want to put $1 million here, and I want to move, stuff like that. But we work with anybody. Our minimum is $5,000. So if you want to spend more than $5,000, you can talk to us. Less than $5,000, honestly, it's just kind of not worth our time because the margins are so thin. But that's fine. We'll still help anybody and direct you to somebody if that's helpful. So we're happy to do that. Secondly, and the way that I explain it to people is like put these 3 things that I'm going to tell you on a spectrum of control on one side and in the system on the other, right? So really, it kind of depends on what you're trying to accomplish and what you're trying to do. So let's say that somebody was like, hey, I've got a bunch of stuff in RSPs and I just want to protect my wealth. I don't really trust the banks. I don't want to have my money in the bank in cash because I'm losing purchasing power, right? So I'm like, okay, cool. We can help you with protecting your RSPs and your retirement. Pardon me. Because we work with Questrade, and you can move your RSPs into physical precious metals. That's one of the things that we can do. And so that's the opposite of in your hand. So if we deliver it to your house, you have absolute control over it. It's 100%. Nobody can take it from you. It's in your possession, maximum control, right? The opposite end of that spectrum is that it's in the system, right? So the Questrade vehicle that we do is outside of the banks. So it sits in a private vault, which is really good. So I'll explain bailouts and bail-ins after this. but that still protects your wealth. Now you lose a bit of money on that because there's premiums that you got to pay. So if you put in, let's say, $100,000, you probably get about $90,000, $95,000, something like that, in actual metal because of the premiums, depending on what you buy. Because that's how the industry makes money, is that we have to sell above spot. So typically you pay anywhere from between about 10 to 15, 20%, depending on what you're buying as a premium above spot price. And spot price is the daily price that you see on the ticker all the time. And so one of the benefits to this is it's physical precious metals. And I'll just make a slight comment about ETFs. So there's SLV and GLD that you can invest in. Those are not actual physical precious metals, but they're supposed to be backed up by physical precious metals, but they're sold at about a 400 to 1 ratio. So for every ounce of gold or silver in those indexes that is backing up that index, there's 400 ounces, 399 ounces roughly of paper that are floating out there. And so when the music stops, a lot of people are going to lose money on that. So I wouldn't really recommend that, but I'm not a financial planner. I'm just telling you what I see. I wouldn't trust it. And there's a lot of evidence, and there's a lot of articles that are coming out recently about the COMEX, which is the commodity exchange in the U.S., that are draining those ETFs. So all of the people that have those essentially continuous contracts, which is what those ETFs are, they're taking delivery of their metal because they don't trust it anymore. So not really a recommendation that I would make. So if you're going to invest in precious metals at all, you want to invest in the very bottom of the market, which is the miners, or you want to invest in the precious metals itself, which is the bullion, which is the opposite end. So you want to be at the very bottom or the very top. Anything in the middle and like anything that's non-physical is a risk, and that's what I meant about that third-party risk. And you still have that if you're going into mining, but at least you're producing the actual asset itself. Okay. Now,
Well, especially when gold is supposed to be a hedge itself. I mean, you're not.
yeah,
The idea is to hedge yourself against risks in this transaction, and obviously it's not your whole portfolio, but you'd put a portion of your savings into this hedge against inflation. You wouldn't want to also be risking that with whatever other financial tools that are out there.
yeah, like high level asset managers, they have restrictions on what they're allowed to do. So we're going to be working with some financial institutions, and the reason they want to work with us is because they have a maximum amount of money that they can put towards their client. They have a maximum amount of their client's money that they can put towards certain things. So let's say I get like $1 million from a client as an asset manager. I can't put all of that $1 million into one thing. That's too much risk. So I have to chop it up into a bunch of different things, right? But I'm limited to what I can do based on their net worth. So, like a financial advisor you'll go to a financial advisor like, what should I invest in? And they'll be like, well, you can put stuff over here, you can put stuff over there, but I can only take 35%, let's say, of your money, and I can only do these things with it because that's what I'm allowed to do by regulation. So gold and silver, because it's a commodity, and bullion specifically is tax exempt. So we have way more agency in what we recommend our clients to do. So it really depends on how much and how safe you want to be. So as an example, so if you're like, hey, I just want to hedge against my net worth, generally that's 10 to 20% of your net worth that you put into gold and silver as a hedge against everything else. So if you had that money in gold just before the 2007-2008 global financial crisis, that 10 to 20% was your best performing asset because everything else collapsed. And then after that, it shot
Yeah.
up, right? And so if that happens again, this is a question everybody should ask themselves. If this was going to happen again, which it will, what does my portfolio look like? And this is one of the reasons that you would think of, well, maybe I should put some money into gold and silver to hedge against the market crashing, because that is coming. I'll show you that in a sec. And so these are the reasoning behind it. So let's say that you think like, hey, I don't trust anybody. I don't trust the banks. I don't trust the government. Just get all of my money out of everything and get it into my possession. Well, you can buy all gold and silver if you want. And so this kind of brings us to my final option, which is our wholesale program. And so what this is basically is a wholesale program outside of the banking system, more or less, that you can own precious metals in a vault, and you're essentially buying ounces in, the like 12.5 kilogram bars. So you have a set amount of ounces that you buy. You can still get delivery of these ounces, but essentially they sit in the vault and it's very liquid. So this is about the most liquid thing you can do. So let's say that you're like, hey, I know things are going to be bad, but I don't think the economy is going to collapse, and I want to be in cash and get a profit on what I think is going to happen. When gold and silver go up, I want to be able to sell that and then reinvest that back into the market totally an option that you can do. You can use this vehicle to do that, and it's very safe. It's very liquid. You can transfer it outside of the country if you want to. You can loan against it, so you can guarantee to get the money out without having to sell the actual underlying asset. Something I've been doing regularly. You can borrow against your holdings to get additional metal if you want. So it's a very unique system. That's kind of one of the things that sets us personally apart, is that we have this ability and access to this through a company called Precious Metals International. Great company. They've been in Canada for like 30 years. We've worked with them a long time, so they're a fantastic what's the word? JV partner, so an ally, a collaborator, whatever you want to call it. And so those are kind of the three options that we have. And a lot of people have been coming to us lately. They're like, hey, I'm losing money just having it sit in my bank account. I don't trust the banks. Oh, yeah. And I was going to mention this. So everybody can think of this too. So if everybody remembers back to the GFC in 2007, 2008, what did we do? We bailed out the banks. Do you remember what bailout is? Yeah. So everybody that doesn't know, bailout. So like, think of this as the bank. So the bank is insolvent, basically. They're like, oh no, we need money. Where's all of our money? We lost all of our money because we're idiots. So the government is like, all right, don't worry, bro. We got you. We'll give a bunch of public money. Here you go to stabilize the bank. So the bank is now whole. That's a bailout, right? So that's money from outside the bank into the bank, right? Now, this is a bail-in, and this is a lot more dangerous and a lot more bad for everybody involved. So So a bail-in is the opposite of that. So bail-in basically means same starting process. They screwed up and they lost a bunch of money and now they're insolvent. Basically what happened to SVB last year that had a trigger. So they didn't de-risk their position. They were stupid with their money, and the bond prices that screwed them over, they basically had to sell bonds to make the money back, and they had huge losses that they couldn't afford, collapsed the bank. Okay. So they bailed out SVB, and all of the bank collapses that happened last year. I think there was 8 major banks last year. Credit Suisse, which is a 250-year-old bank, collapsed. Okay, those were all bailouts. They were all bought up by other banks to stabilize the banks. Now, a bail-in is the opposite. So instead of money coming from outside of the bank into the bank, is the bank takes all of the assets in the bank, which includes safety deposit boxes. I should mention. Is that they take those assets and transfer them into either stock in the bank or debt in the bank. So they basically like, hey, thanks for trusting us with your money. We'll take it because we need it. Here's some stock in the bank that's now worthless. And that's what a bailout is.
Oh, wow.
Bail in. And we have that legislation already on the books that happened in 2015 and 2019.
So it's another type of soft default, essentially. They're defaulting on their depositors by instead giving them a worthless piece of paper IOU that's a stock in their business that's no longer viable. That's terrible. That's terrible. So that's another risk that people are concerned about. And
it is.
If they're going to have their savings and then be able to utilize those savings, even in a scenario like that, you want to have it somewhere else, and in something that's in the bank, preferably not high risk. Because like we're in a situation where like savers are forced to go in the stock market, they're forced to get into real estate, they're forced to get into all these other things because their money's just sitting there losing value all the time. So instead, you have to get something that's going to have a return.
Yeah, and so there's a couple of things that I want to show everybody that will put this into visual perspective. Give me one sec, I'll pull it up.
Should I pop that on the screen then?
Yeah, give me one sec to find it. Here it is. Yeah, I can put it up now. So remember back in 2007, 2008. So these are the unrealized losses of the banks, right? So down here is 2007, 2008. So basically some of these banks, and this was the residential subprime mortgage crisis. That was this. Okay. This is now.
Holy cow. That's nasty. U.S. banks continue to amass record unrealized investment losses. Unreal.
Yeah. So this is going to be a doozy, right? And so the other thing I want to show you, and so I said earlier, so when SVB collapsed last year, there was this funding program, so the Bank Term Funding Program. This is one of the things that they use to paper over the bank. So this was essentially a bailout without actually calling it a bailout. They basically gave banks a lending option so that they could take money out without having to sell their assets. And there's a bunch of other nonsense that happened. It's kind of out of scope for what we're talking about right now. So the other thing, where to go? So this is what I was going to show you a little bit earlier. So this is the run up to the Depression. Okay, so 1913, basically right here, which is where the central bank started. So this is 1916 over here somewhere. So it's slowly going up and down, blah 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 blah. So now we have this massive incline, right? September 2nd, 1929, Black Tuesday, Black Thursday. I can't remember which Black day it was. Can't remember which day it fell on. But then you had this massive fall, a pullback, and then a massive fall, right? So this was a 90% decline over the space of 3 years, right?
Wow.
This is where we are now, more or less.
This is it looks the same.
Exactly. And to that point, this is what the S&P 500 now versus 1929. So this is, I think, the Dow Jones, because I don't think the Fortune 500 was a thing back then. But this is essentially what it looked like. And this fall is so the white line is where we are now. But this fall
right.
on this side, more or less, is just this part right here.
Wow. Wow.
And so what I'm saying, and what I was telling you about central bank digital currencies, is this to me is what the plan is, right? The only way they're going to get us to accept whatever nonsense bullshit that they want us to accept is if everything that we have doesn't work, doesn't effective. We can't use it, right? And so everybody that's in the know, that's in the financial sector, right? All the Fortune 500 people, they're selling their assets. They're selling their stocks. We're at the top of the market. We're at historic highs. And let me show you one more thing. Bring up my page one more time. So this is essentially the history. If I go, oops, sorry, let me just reload that. This is so the Dow Jones Industrial Average 100-year historic data. Okay, so this is 1929, right? Down all the way down here to the 30s, right? But if you invested here, right, somewhere around here, it took you almost 10 years to get back to where you were, right? And
right.
Every time this has happened, right? So this is the 60s, started to go down, and where's 1971? So this right here, this recession is right here, and it's right there is when we got off the gold standard in 1971. So from this point, 1971 to basically this point, 10 years. No, more than that. 15 years. So if you invested in the stock market at this time, it took you 15 years to get back to where you were if you didn't sell. Right? And now we're at the all-time high. How high can it go before it starts to come down again? Not much longer.
Right. Right. And then you have just nothing but nothing to gain, everything to lose.
Yeah. And so I've kind of said this a lot lately, is that the best time to buy gold and silver was 10 years ago after 2007. The second best time is today.
Right, because you want to hedge what's possibly coming. And like the question though too is like, are you really taking any risk even if doom and gloom doesn't take place? If the economy recovers and you're doing good, what's the harm in owning gold?
Yeah. The worst case scenario is you have it and you can sell it later. It's going to go up in value by average about 7% a year. That's a pretty good return to not do literally anything and have literally no risk.
I wanted to ask one question. If you sell your gold, do you have to pay capital gains on it like you would for any other asset?
Yes, you do. It depends. So like Chrystia Freeland's ridiculous, like 66% communism that she's putting forward. That would still apply. And this kind of goes back to my original point. Why do we have to accept this absolute garbage nonsense? They doubled our debt. They gave us ridiculous inflation, and they're like, hey, we at the same time that you guys have to pay more money, we're going to give ourselves a raise. How are these people still in power, bro?
Yeah.
It's so stupid.
Well, exactly. but it is a capital gains on money that you pull out above two. There's a dog in my room. Go on, get out of here. That's over $200,000. Anything over that that you would pull out. I don't think anybody in the audience is pulling out like $200,000 plus
Hey, can you do me a favor and pull
of
up
like
Brando's comment?
earnings.
8:45.
Brando's comment. Here, let me pull
Yeah,
this up.
8:45. Because I'll answer this.
There we go.
Yeah. Listen,
Nice sales
man.
pitch, bro.
Yeah, listen, man. These are the facts of history. I'm telling you this information. I may sell gold, but I got into this because I see these things happening for like the last 20, 30 years. You can take this information however you want it. I don't care what you do with your money. You protect it or don't. It doesn't affect me. But I'm doing this because I want our country to succeed and I want people to be able to defend their wealth that is being stolen from us. So if you think that I'm just here to make money, I'm not. I'm talking about the history of this stuff to try and tell people this is the risk that we face and something that I see as an affront to not only us, but our families and our future. So I'm not just here to make money. Otherwise, I'd be doing stuff completely different than this. So take that for whatever.
Well, when people come to my shop, and they want the car fixed. They're like, you just want to make money. You're not here to really help me with my car, are you? Yeah, I'm here to help you with your car, and that's how I make money. So it's you can be both at the same time. So
Yeah, I like
first
doing
off,
win-win stuff,
before we get exactly, win-win is great. And before we move to the next segment, I just want to say thank you for joining tonight. And of course, you're welcome back anytime. It was great meeting you in person. And
yeah, man, real pleasure, man.
Thank you so much.